each one of us, we have these aspirations in our lives. You think of that word aspiration, it's a hope or an ambition of achieving something. And I think all of us, we've had those times in our life where you have this aspiration, like this is this thing that I want to accomplish. Thinking back to my own life when I was much younger, I remember I had a friend who was a very good wrestler. He used to wrestle when we were like kids, like not like WWF, like jumping off your parents' couch and elbowing each other, but like legitimately wrestling, And I remember when we were in middle school, I decided, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna wrestle. You know what I mean? Because my friend was doing it, I'm like, I'll just do that. And so I remember that I decided I was gonna wrestle. And so, having never wrestled before, it was kind of a steep learning curve. But you learn really quickly when you're wrestling in middle school or in high school that depending on who the good wrestlers are, you just don't want to end up in their weight class. And so at the time I was I'm still a little guy, but I was littler than I was now. I was only 11, 12 years old at the time. And so the guy who was wrestling at 119 pounds, he was a really good wrestler and been doing it a really long time. So I was like, okay, so I needed to wrestle at 112 pounds. That was the wrestling class that I wanted to get into. But the only problem is I was about 122 pounds. And so, because I want to wrestle. I don't want to be sitting on the bench. I need to get into the weight class, and I'm young. So then you're like, okay, so how do you do this? And of course, what you don't realize that in wrestling they have all these crazy ways of you like losing weight. And so I don't recommend this stuff, but I was so passionate about wanting to wrestle at 112 pounds that I started drinking like a Nutrisystem shake. Which is really nasty when you're 12 years old. It's really nasty when you're older, but it's especially nasty when you're 12 years old. And I would walk around school and I'd spit in a cup, because you're trying to get the water weight out of you. And then, because it wasn't going off fast enough, we would take plastic bags and we would put plastic bags on under our clothes, and so you'd sweat all day, and then you'd go and you'd run, so you get extra water weight. And so sure enough, I was really committed to this. And so sure enough, when the first meet came around and we were doing a wrestle off to see who was going to wrestle, I weighed in right at 112 pounds, and I got to wrestle for the very first time, in a match. And it was really bad, actually. It was all fun and games until a guy's got me in a headlock, and I'm just like, why am I doing this with my time, But I had this hope of wrestling, and I didn't do horrible that year. I think I was about 7-4 for the year, but after doing it for a year, I didn't really care about it all that much anymore. I'm like, I don't want to get, but the things that you'll do when you have this desired outcome. And I think for each one of us, we have these things that we aspire to. And what's beautiful is that Jesus wants to make sure that in our aspirations, that we understand kind of the rules of aspiration. Like if we're going to desire to achieve certain things, let's make sure we keep the main things in the main places. So in order to get at that, I want you to open up in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 20. Matthew chapter 20. We're going to be taking verses 20 to 28 in Matthew chapter 20. So if you didn't bring a Bible with you to church, don't worry about it, because those are the books on the pews in front of you, the seats in front of you. Pull that, that's the Bible. Or of course, if you have a smart device, open that baby up, type in Matthew 20, verses 20 to 28. Now, you'll see why I want to talk about aspiration right away, because look at what happens. In Matthew chapter 20, verse 20, it says, "Then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to him with her sons, kneeling down and asking something from him. And he said to her, 'What do you wish?' And she said to him, 'Grant that these 2 sons of mine may sit, one on your right hand and the other on the left, in your kingdom.' But Jesus answered and said, 'You do not know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I'm about to drink, and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?' And they said to him, 'We are able.' And he said to them," verse 23, "You will indeed drink my cup and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with. But to sit on my right hand and on my left is not mine to give, but it is for those to whom it is prepared by my Father." And when the 10 heard it, they were greatly displeased with the two brothers. But Jesus called them to himself and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many." Now, this whole series that we're doing, that's called Real Talk, we're seeing how Jesus has this great ability to get to the heart of the matter. And I think the reason this is so important is for most of us, if we're not careful, we live our lives on the peripheries. Like we spend our whole life dealing with the smoke rather than putting out the fire. And oftentimes we need to ask questions to be able to get to the heart of what's really going on. See, oftentimes, and I say that, and I realize it's so easy for us if we're not careful to say, "Oh, well, yeah, we need to get to the heart of the matter." But we kind of just dismiss it. But ask yourself for a moment, how much of your life do you spend not on the root causes of things or the heart of the things, but on the details around it? I think for a lot of us, we spend a lot of time there. That we deal with just what's in front of us, not dealing with what is behind what's in front of us. And the problem with that is you will spend your entire life busy not really getting anywhere. Because oftentimes the superficial things they're just symptoms of a much bigger thing that happens internally in the heart. And so what I love about Jesus is that Jesus doesn't want us to waste our time. He realizes that our time is precious and time is fragile, and lost time is never found. And once you lose that time, you can't go back and regain it again. He wants to make sure that we get right at the heart of the matter. So here, this whole thing here begins with, notice it says in verse 20, "Then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to him with her sons, kneeling down and asking something from him. And he said to her, 'What do you wish?' And she said, 'Grant that these two sons of mine may sit one on your right hand and the other on your left in your kingdom.'" Now, what does this teach us? This teaches us quite simply that aspiration is normal. That aspiration is normal. It's very normal for James and John's mom to want to see her sons do well. So aspiration is absolutely normal. She comes and she says to them, "Grant that these two sons of mine, grant that James and John could sit at your right hand and your left hand in your kingdom." See, every mom or every parent knows what it's like to want their children to do well. Right? I mean, parents will go to bat. There are parents who get arrested at ball games because, you know what I mean? Like they just want their child to it's supposed to be a touchdown and that was a penalty, and they freak out and it's really embarrassing, but it's because aspiration is really normal. It's super normal that all of us left up to our own devices are going to aspire to attain and achieve certain things. So what's interesting here is that in Mark's gospel, James and John approach Jesus themselves, but here in Matthew, we find out that it's James and John's mom comes. And I love it because she comes and she approaches Jesus. She starts talking to him and he says, well, what do you want? What are you looking for? And so she says, "Will you grant that my two sons will sit in close proximity to you?" See, the idea of someone who's sitting on the right hand or on the left hand in the kingdom of Jesus, they're close to the king, so they're close to the Lord. And they're close to where everything's happening. She wants her sons to be right in the middle of what is going on and all that pertains to Jesus' prestige and his power. And it's really easy, you hear this stuff and you hear sermons and you think, oh, it's just horrible that they would do that. But it's actually really normal. I don't know about you, but it's like if Jesus is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, then I kind of want to be right where Jesus is. right? I want to be right where the action is at, right? And if right now we have this presidential election coming up. And again, just a quick reminder, search the scriptures, find out what these candidates believe, and vote based on your own conscience before the Lord. Don't forget to vote. Jesus was a part of the world that we live in. And Jesus wants us as followers of Jesus to be part of the world that we live in. So make sure that you vote. But whoever gets elected, right, there's all sorts of people who want to be close to the president. It's very normal. People aspire to cabinet positions and appointments and all these different things, just like James and John want, and just like their mom wants for them. So one of the rules of aspiration is that aspiration is really normal. It's real life, normal stuff. But what's interesting is Jesus then asks a question back to them. He says in verse 23, or in verse 22, he says, you don't know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I'm about to drink and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? And they say, we are able. And then Jesus says, you will indeed drink my cup and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with. But to sit on my right hand and my left hand is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom it is prepared by my Father. See, Jesus' answer it's firm, but it's also probing. First he says to him, you actually don't know what you're aspiring to. Which I think that's always an important part of all of our aspirations, is to remember that oftentimes we really don't know what we're asking for. Like, I'll give you an example. The love that people fall into and out of in high school is really it's kind of explosive, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like people, you're in high school, you fall just over the heels, you're in love, right? And you're like, oh, I can't live without that person. But you can meet many people who the person they were radically in love with in high school, when they go back to their 25th anniversary or reunion for their class, they're like, God, thank you so much. I didn't marry that person. Any of you guys ever have that experience? Don't raise your hand. But oftentimes, when you think, I just need to spend the rest of my life, you don't know what you're asking for. You don't really know all that's entailed in the aspiration that you have. Right? And so Jesus is saying, no, you guys, you don't really know what you're asking for. Because what these guys are talking about and what Jesus is talking about, sitting at his right and his left hand in his kingdom, they don't understand what this is all about right now. And he asked them this question, are you able to drink the cup that I'm about to drink and be baptized with the baptism that I'm about to? See, Jesus is not talking about when he is glorified on the throne. He's talking about when he is glorified on the cross. And remember, when Jesus was crucified on that cross, there was a person on each side of him. See, they think that the coming of Jesus' kingdom is just all about pomp and circumstance and thrones. But Jesus is like, no, the coming of my kingdom is about suffering. And before the crown, there is the cross. Now talk about aspiration. Now, I don't want to just skip over that. Because we see, we live in a day and age where everybody just wants everything, right? It's like we live in an entitlement culture. You know what I mean? Where everyone just I don't want to do any work. I just because I went to college, I should be the CEO. I never worked a day in my life, but I should be the CEO because my parents told me that I'm amazing, and so now I should be the CEO, And we forget that before someone becomes a CEO, they put in all this time and all this work and all this energy. You see these amazing athletes, who are performing at this high level, and we see them on game day, but you forget that all year long they are grinding this thing out. They are studying and working, and it's so much time is put in before someone can do something that is extraordinary. And I think we forget that sometimes. Because for James and for John and ultimately what we're going to find for all the disciples, they don't realize, because everyone wants to that spot, they don't realize, no. In order to be there, you need to go through hell to get there. And I think I just want to encourage you, and is that oftentimes the things that you want, you need to be willing to keep going even when it doesn't go good. And I think for a lot of us, we quit before something amazing happens because we actually have never learned the art of perseverance. I mean, can you imagine Jesus, right? When he was fasting for 40 days and he was driven by the Spirit into the wilderness, and Satan came and tempted him. And when Satan was tempting him, he said, listen, look at all the kingdoms of the world, right? I'm going to give them to you if you bow down and worship me. See, what's amazing about what Satan offers Jesus is Jesus, those were already his inheritance. But in order for Jesus to achieve that inheritance, he had to go through the cross. But Satan is like, I'll give it to you now. And so often, we do not achieve the things that we desire to achieve because we are willing to take a fake substitute for the thing that we really want because we're not willing to persevere through. And how many of us, you look back on our lives and there was something that you were doing that you knew God had called you to, that you knew brought blessings and glory to God and blessings into the world, but you quit because you got tired. You weren't willing to keep going. I was talking to a pastor, a guy who God has used in a real powerful way, and I said, he's been in ministry for 35 years, and I said, what? Of course, other than Jesus, like what God has done, what would you attribute it to? And he said, well, sometimes the guy who wins is just the last guy standing. And he's like, all along the way, I could have quit. I wanted to quit. I thought about quitting. I planned my exit, And he's like, but by God's grace, I just kept showing up. And God keeps working when we keep showing up. And so for James and John, they don't realize what they're asking for. Because in the Bible, the cup was characteristically referred in the Old Testament to judgment and retribution. It shows up the prophet Isaiah, the prophet Jeremiah, a lot of different places. And so Jesus is talking about the sufferings that are going to inaugurate his kingdom, that are going to bring his kingdom forward. And he says to him, he's like, yeah, you will drink my cup. You got to remember that these two sons, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, James was the first martyr in the book of Acts. And John ended up exiled on the mining colony of Patmos, where he received the book of Revelation. So these guys understood these sufferings that Jesus is talking about ultimately. But Jesus does say to them, and I think it's really fascinating, he says, but to sit at my right hand and my left is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom it is prepared by my Father. See, now this is one of those places, and I love this about the Bible because the Bible's got all these tensions, right? And if you really read the Bible and you really think about it, about what the Bible says from cover to cover, there's a lot of areas where there's just like, well, how does that work? And a lot of people would say, well, how can Jesus be God in the flesh if he doesn't know to whom sit at his right hand and his left hand? And the reason Jesus is God and he doesn't know that is because part of God's plan in the incarnation, Jesus in flesh, he was functionally subordinate to his Father despite being equal in essence. Can I give you a great example of this? In marriage. You know how in marriage it says that husbands should love their wives and die for them, and wives should submit to their husbands as unto the Lord? Some people don't like that. Oftentimes it's people who don't want to believe the Bible. They say, oh man, I can't believe you believe the Bible. Wives submitting to your husband. Is there anything more sexist? Actually, if you think about it, would you rather die or submit? Anybody who wants to choose? So if the Bible is sex, it's actually anti-male. Because he's saying, you guys, you need to die for your wives. And a woman very easily can submit to the self-sacrificial love of her husband. Because her husband now has her best interest in mind. Now, that's a big thing. Real quick, I don't want to get off on the marriage discussion, but some of you guys, listen, you love Jesus, you think your wife's supposed to submit to you, but you're not living self-sacrificially love to her. You better stop that business. You love her self-sacrificially, that's your job. God will work on her part of it. But too often guys say, well, you should submit to me. And yeah, I feel bad because you have these godly women and they have these husbands who love Jesus, but they're really not following him. And they make their wives they have to make dumb decisions because their husband's a knucklehead. And that's just not right. It's not right. All the wives clap, all the guys are like, darn, Fusco, get us back. I'm aspiring. Get us back to the aspiration. I got caught preaching my example. Let me get back to my example. In marriage, a husband and a wife, right? They are equal in essence, both created in the image and likeness of God. But there is a functional subordination in the way God designed the way a marriage should work. The husband lives self-sacrificially, loves self-sacrificially, and the wife submits to the Lord and submits to that self-sacrificial love. They're equal in essence, but there is a functional subordination. It's the same picture. They're both right there. Now, if you don't have a clue what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. Because I realize I just kind of dropped a little bomb in there, and we'll leave it there, and there's a lot of nuances to that. But Jesus is fully God, but yet in his incarnation, although equal in essence, is functionally subordinate. Where he's saying there's certain things that he's entrusted to his Father, which is part of God's prerogative. Now, what I love about this, right, we say aspiration is normal. In verse 24, look at what you get. And when the 10 heard it, they were greatly displeased with the two brothers. Now, why were they greatly displeased? It's not about humility, it's about jealousy. It's like, you know that the other 10, they wish that they thought of that. Like, why didn't I think to go in? Why did I get my mom to come and talk to Jesus so that I got my spot? You know, like, and so they're thinking to themselves, what was I thinking? So they're mad that they spoke, but really what it says is the aspiration is normal. So what do you aspire to today? What is the normal part of your life that you're like, this is something that I'm trying to achieve? Don't think that it's necessarily bad, right? It's normal. So the first rule of aspiration is that aspiration is normal. But then Jesus pops up in verse 26. Look at what he says. Or excuse me, in verse 25 he says, but Jesus called them to himself and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles, they lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. For whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. You want a rule for aspiration? Aspire for the right motivation. Aspire for the right motivation. See, because everybody aspires and aspiration is normal, now we need to make sure that our aspirations, the things that we are seeking to achieve, that we have the right motivation. And Jesus gets right at the heart of this in what he says here. He says, listen, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles, the nations, they lord it over them, and those who exercise authority among them. So what they're saying is that amongst the non-Jewish people, the way leadership and authority, it's functioning as a kind of a lordship over people. Well, it's my decision and you can't make the decision and it's not your call and all this stuff, right? And he's like, but it shouldn't be that way among you. See, really what Jesus is doing is he's saying aspiration is normal, but these guys, their desires are just like the world. They have worldly aspirations. Because he's saying, you guys shouldn't all be upset. Why? Because the Romans, they enforced their power with a strong arm. They made sure that you knew your place. And in a lot of ways, in the day and age we live in, you have a lot of that going on, don't you? You go to your job. See, a lot of people, because authority can be oppressive, people think that we shouldn't have any authority, right? But you got to remember, the complete absence of authority is anarchy. No one feels safe. But God didn't design authority to be oppressive, but he designed authority to be something that will be edifying so that people will grow. Like parents. The parental authority that parents have is not to oppress your children, but to encourage and help your children grow. In the same way, within God's kingdom, the church isn't run like, it's not anarchy where everyone just does whatever. There's people who have to make decisions. I'm one of those people, and please pray for me. It's hard to I make a million decisions between good and good. It's like everything that we want to do, it's all good. Like, I love all of it, but it's not humanly possible to do all of it. So I have to make decisions. We're going to do that good thing, and we're not going to do that other good thing. And people get mad because you're like, why aren't you doing that thing? Well, we can't do everything. But you know what is amazing, though? Oftentimes the people get mad that the people aren't serving anywhere, which is a whole other thing. where it's like they're upset, but they're like, where are you rolling up your sleeves and helping except for complaining, Because oftentimes when you got a hand on a rower, as I always say, you can't rock the boat when you're busy rowing it, right? You're busy rowing the thing. You're like, and everybody's like, come and rock it. Listen, no, just keep rowing the boat. Pick up an oar, and then we'll talk about it while we're working. Anyway. There's nothing worse than when you're rowing and people are rocking the boat. You want to hit them with the paddle, but you can't. Because I'm a pastor. I'm not supposed to hit anybody with the paddle. But if Jesus were to turn his cheek for 1 second, Anyway, listen, pray for me. God's not done working on me yet, But authority is not designed to be, I oppress you and suppress your gifts. No, authority is actually designed to be, I encourage those gifts to come to the surface. Like as a parent, if I oppress and suppress my kids when it's all about me just wanting them to be good, perfect little kids. Because some part of their personalities might show as rebellion now, but if it's nurtured, might be the gifting that God uses. Like, let me give you an example. My son, Obadiah, I love him so much. Obadiah is a talker. I can't fathom where he gets this from. Right? And what I love is that, and Obadiah, like, he's a respectful dude, and I really appreciate it. But every time, like, we have parent-teacher conferences, and we love all of our kids' teachers. We love them. They always say, Obadiah's a chatty guy, And I always giggle, because I'm like, yeah, he is. But I know that God's going to use Obadiah's mouth. Because guess who got in trouble for being the chatty kid all of his life in school? And so it's about how do we help Obadiah know when to be quiet, but not to discourage the very gifts that God has placed in his life. And so what he's saying here is he's saying, listen, the way the world does authority, they lord it over you, they suppress you and oppress you, not so among you. Not so among you. Why? He says, whoever desires, verse 26, to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be the first among you, let him be your slave. You want the right motivation? The right motivation in aspiration is to serve. Just to be servant-hearted. To say, I serve my Lord and my King Jesus, and you get the benefit. And I do it for the Lord, and because I do it for the Lord, I will serve you. 1 Samuel chapter 12, verse 24 says it this way. Only fear the Lord and serve him in truth with all your heart, for consider what great things he has done for you. Oh, I love that. See, when you consider what great things God has done for you, you will fear him. And the idea of fearing God, it means both fearing God's authority because he is the ultimate judge of all the earth, and also fearing breaking God's heart because of the relationship we get to have with God, right? We fear him and then we serve him in truth. So the right motivation for us to aspire to is that we be simple servants. See, the point is that the values of our society, whether it was Roman in Jesus' day or good old-fashioned 21st century Americanism in our day, does not apply to the people of God. Authority and greatness among the disciples are meant to be used in the reverse of the way that the world uses it, where the world says, I am going to oppress you with my authority, and Jesus says, no, I will serve you with my authority. Are you a servant? Or is your way of, I want what I want, if you don't give me what I want, I will get mad at you, and I will let you know how upset I am with you. Listen to John 12:26. If anyone serves me, let him follow me, and where I am, there my servant will be also. Now don't miss this. If anyone serves me, him my Father will honor. Wow. If anyone serves me, him my Father will honor. So at this point in the message, the next question comes is, how are you serving Jesus? And brothers and sisters, listen, for most of us, we're not. Our entire life is designed to serve us and our aspirations. But if you spend your whole life serving yourself and your own desires and aspirations, then you are aspiring to the wrong things and you will never achieve the things that you truly want. See, there's nothing worse than living a life when you realize that everything that I've done, it's all been fine and well, but I missed the main thing about life, which is serving the Lord. Brothers, I'm here to tell you, sisters, God is growing this congregation so quickly that we can't keep up with what God is doing. And our biggest prayer is that the family of God here at Crossroads would step up. Because, like, kids ministry, add a lid, we need more help. Student ministries, add a lid, we need more help. Like, and every single ministry, our women's ministry doubled in size and then it doubled again. It's like, just need help there. Men's ministry doubled in size. Guess what? It just doubled again in the last 4 weeks. Need help there. Greeters, ushers, we have a Sunday night service. There's a million things going on. Like literally, if we send 100 people to Crossroads Kids right now, they still need more people. Because of the number of people that God is sending here for us to serve. But then you ask yourself, like, Lord, if as a big church, why does it only seem like a small percentage of the body is serving? And a small percentage does all the service for everything, and the large percentage don't. And the Lord said, well, Daniel, it's because they're too busy. So the Lord's, I was praying, like, Lord, what's going on? They're too busy. They're too busy building their kingdoms. It's not that they're doing bad things, most of them, but it's they're not keeping the most important things in front of them. And he's like, and now you have to go remind them of that. I'm not saying that whatever you're doing is wrong, unless the Bible says it's wrong, and then it's absolutely wrong. But what I am saying is that if your aspirations do not include being a servant of the Most High God, then you're aspiring the wrong things. And I would be a terrible pastor if I didn't tell you that. And I don't have to look at and audit your life. You just say, Lord, is the aspirations of my life lined up with what you say true greatness is in your kingdom? And Lord, and this is what I love about the Lord, because the Lord doesn't just give us a hard time because he appreciates that. He's just kind of fun that way. Like, I love giving everyone a hard time. The Lord loves us enough to, like the rich young ruler that we saw in the last message. The Lord loves us enough to challenge us when we're living in a way that does not line up with his purposes and plans for our abundant life, for the life that God has for us. So make sure that your aspiration is for the right motivation, which is to be a servant. To be a servant, right? Now, in verse 28, we're going to close this out. So I'm going to invite the worship team to come on out. Look at what it says here. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. Brothers and sisters, we need to aspire like Jesus. Because we aspire like Jesus, because Jesus isn't saying, listen, you want to be great in the kingdom, be the servant of all. You want to be the first, be the slave. He says, no, just watch me. See, I love that. Jesus doesn't just talk the talk. He walks it. He's like, look, you want to see how this works? Watch me. Because he says, just as the Son of Man, I didn't come to be served. I came to serve and to give my life as a ransom for many. See, when we aspire like Jesus, we realize that Jesus is the supreme example of service to others. And I think that this is really powerful. Because we don't follow a myth. We follow a person who is the ultimate example of the things that he wants us to be. See, Jesus has been explaining to his disciples all through this last section or this middle section of Matthew's gospel that he was going to die. He was going to be betrayed, he was going to die, but now he explains why he's dying. And look at why Jesus is dying. To give his life a ransom for many. Now you think of a ransom. Now I don't know about you, I like me a good suspense movie where, someone's kidnapped, they're trying to get the person back, and there's a smart guy, or girl who's got all the crazy military training, and they know how to get him back. But the ransom is the money that you pay to get somebody back. That's exactly why Jesus died. And brothers and sisters, that is why we believe in Jesus, because Jesus gave his life to pay the ransom for my life and for your life, for the sins, the mistakes that you have made, the rebellion against God that we have all found ourselves involved in. Jesus paid that price in his own life. And my friends, that's the good news. And the good news is that if you want your life to be redeemed by Jesus, he has already paid the price on the cross. That's why it says a life is a ransom for all? No, for many. Why? Because not all will believe. But if all would believe, that ransom is sufficient for everybody. Now listen, Jesus already paid the ransom for you. He already did it. And Jesus desires that you allow him to pay the ransom for your life, but you have to respond to it. You have to say, thank you, Jesus, and receive him and follow him. See, the ransom has been paid at the cross, but the application of that ransom price gets applied by faith. Gets applied. When we respond in faith, when we reach out our hands and we receive the gift of God's grace, that's how this ransom is applied. And I don't want any of you, I do not want one of you to leave here today and not allow the ransom that Jesus paid for with his own life at the cross. Don't leave here without letting that be applied to your life. Now, you know what's powerful about this? It's that this ransom paid was prophesied long before this ever happened. Jesus doesn't just like show up on the scene and just say like all this stuff, and everyone's like, wow, Jesus is so trippy, man. How does he know this stuff? And Jesus is the fulfillment of promises that were given hundreds and hundreds of years before this happened. Listen to Isaiah chapter 53. Just verses 10 to 12. The whole chapter is powerful, but just verses 10 to 12, it says this: "Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He has put him to grief. When you make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see the labor of his soul and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant shall justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul unto death, and he was numbered with the transgressors, and he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors." Those words prophesied by the prophet Isaiah was a good 500-600 years before Jesus comes and says, "For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." See, Jesus is the promised suffering servant of Isaiah chapter 52 and 53. And he gave his life as a ransom for you, for me. For everyone who realizes that they have failed and fallen short and made mistakes, Jesus said, I'm going to come and I'm going to ransom them back. And I'm not just going to talk about it, I'm going to do it with my own life. And he did it for us. And if you're here today and you've never put your faith and trust in Jesus, I believe you are here today, right now, whether in our sanctuary or part of one of our campuses online, so that you would hear that Jesus has given his life already to ransom you back, and he wants to be able to pay that price so that you could come home to God. But you have to respond to it. And once you respond to it, like many here have already done, then you live your life just like Jesus did by the power of the Spirit, and you serve other people. You don't allow Jesus to pay the price. You say, okay, well, now that Jesus paid the price, now I just serve myself the rest of my life. I'm just redeemed by Jesus. No. Now, because Jesus is the ultimate example, the supreme example of a servant, then we say, Lord, I am your servant. Use my life. Lord, let me partner with you to see your kingdom touch down. And if you're here today and you've already put your faith and trust in Jesus, you're like, man, I believe in Jesus. Serve the Lord. Respond to his service for you by serving him in the gladness of a heart that's been redeemed. And if you're one of those people, like many people who along the way you served and it got hard and things didn't go the way that you want and all these different things, you get hurt in the midst of it, just keep going. Learn the beautiful art of perseverance. I'll be honest with you. I've been in pastoral ministry now for 15 years. And along that 15-year journey, I've thought about quitting in a million different situations. You get hurt, yet you try and help people, they get mad at you. Sometimes you're just a knucklehead, you do dumb stuff anyway, and you're like, I shouldn't do this anyway. You have all these things that go on. But what I've learned is that if you keep showing up, God keeps working. And you know what's amazing? If you stop showing up, God will keep working, but you don't get to be a part of it. And so often in life, it's about the art of just showing up. And if you show up, God will work. And God's kingdom isn't dependent on us, it's dependent on him. But I think God likes it when we keep showing up. Even when we show up, we're all mangled up. We're like, man, I don't got anything, you know. I think he especially likes working in that situation. Because he knows that ain't no one gonna get the glory but him. You'd be like, man, I'm just happy I was alive that day. But listen, serve the Lord. If you want to be great in the eternal kingdom of Jesus, it goes to the servant, to the person who's voluntarily decided, I'm a slave for Jesus. That language is not warm and fuzzy. That language is provocative. Why? Because life in God's kingdom is provocative. Amen.